Having talked at length on a previous video about making buttons using coins rather than button moulds, examples such as these, I want to make some thread woven death head buttons. Although I have had a go at doing this in the past using a coin as a mould, there's just something that makes it easier when using the correct button mould such as this. So this is a little wooden, I think it's an MDF button mould, easily available from button suppliers. I will include a list section below. And you cover these in thread to create intricate and pretty patterns that can result in something along the lines of this. This is just a little practice what I did. This is not the colours I want to use, but this is the style of button I want to make. So I did actually buy the correct equipment. So these are some button moulds that I bought from Gina B Silkworks, which along with her instructions I will include in the links below. I measured the covered buttons that are on the coat and bought, well, initially I bought these ones but I was mistaken, so these are 35mm buttons and I needed these ones which are actually 40mm, which equals to about 1.75 inches, which is my finished button size. So I'm going to, first of all I'm going to demonstrate how a death's head button is made with a simple single colour, and then I'm going to show you the ones I want to make for the coat, which are rather more dramatic and a little more gothic. To prepare the button mould for the thread wrapping, you need a small piece of beeswax and you just rub it all over the surface of the mould very thoroughly, like this. And then I do the back, making the whole table and camera shake. And then finally I also like to do a bit around the edge, because this is where you also want the threads to grip onto. And it will melt a little bit with your fingers, and there's never any trace of the wax in the final result. It's fine. It just works as a nice little natural adhesive. For my sample button, I'm going to demonstrate with this pearl cotton, which is absolutely fantastic. Now you can work with a short length, or you can wind some into a bobbin like this, or you can just work from the ball. It's fine. Leave yourself a tail, which gives you something to hold on to. So you start by doing a wrap over the thread 3 times across the button like that. A little bit like eyelets. I find it sometimes helps to think of a clock face. And then once you have wrapped around 3 times like that, turn it anti-clockwise, and I keep my finger sort of pinched on the thread there. And then I wrap 3 more times to cause a cross. Turn again. If you need to, if you need to make the cross more even, you have to adjust the threads a little bit. Wrap around there, anchoring your threads onto the cross. Turn 1 turn anti-clockwise. And there. And always turning, or I always turn anti-clockwise. And there. So what you really want is a perfect square. So if it looks a little bit uneven, which that does, I use my fingernails to sort of adjust the way the thread is sitting, like that. And then you just keep going, and these threads that you're wrapping over your cross form the cover of the button, and you want them to lie next to each other, not over each other. You want it to lie as smooth and as flat and as even as possible. And you just keep going round and round. So if I carry on like this with this button, I'll end up with one completely smooth single coloured button. If you want to add other threads, that's when you can start making the patterns and the crosses and the stripes. But for now, I'm just going to demonstrate this as it is in the single colour. And now you have the technique for creating a thread covered death's head button. You just keep turning your mould and wrapping your threads to make sure they lie smooth and flat and next to each other rather than on top of each other to create your interlocking crossing pattern. Once you reach the centre of the button, you can turn it over, cut off your thread, and work the loose end into the back of your stitching, just to keep all of those threads nice and secure. This isn't absolutely essential, you could just tie your threads off in a knot, but if you sort of wrap your loose threads around the cross pattern on the back of the button, you secure everything nice and smoothly in place and stop the threads slipping around the edge of the button mould. So I just do this with both of my loose ends, and then if you've got enough, this is completely optional, you can bring the thread up through the hole in the button and do a little cross stitch over the very middle of all of your threads, just to make sure they're all held nice and securely in place. And then if you've still got a long enough tail of your threads left, you could use that to sew your button onto your garment, but that's not essential. You could get a completely new piece of thread to sew it on with. And that is your button complete, and it's time to move on to the final button design. I wanted the striking black and white contrast, and I don't know, because it's black and white and there's so much association with that and imagery, it went through a couple of different looks. So here's some of the styles I ended up with before finishing on this one. They can look a little bit Art Deco, they can look very 18th century obviously, because that's what this style's from. They also went through a bit of a stage of looking like a Maltese cross, or the sort of cross that to me just looks like the sort of thing you see on First World War German aeroplanes, or medals, which I'm not quite sure that's the effect I wanted. But anyway, this is my end result. And to achieve that, I used the 40mm button mould, and then for the thread wrapping, I used a combination of a DeVere silk thread. I'm really taken by DeVere silk thread. I will include a link to them below. They specialise in silk embroidery threads, and when you go on their website and pick from their wonderful range of colours, they have a size chart on there explaining
which threads you need to go with to replicate an embroidery thread you're used to sewing with. So if you're used to sewing with a 6 strand of a strand of embroidery thread, the ones that come on a skein, it will recommend you buy, I can't remember the sizes off the top of my head, but it goes through, so if you want 1 strand of embroidery thread, you buy this size, and so on and so forth. So this is their embroidery thread in pure white, and this is the equivalent of 3 strands of embroidery thread from a skein, which I find is a really good weight for doing decorative stitching. The single strand is really good for machine or hand sewing of delicate garments, and then the 6 strand is really good for doing eyelets. But I mean, they're all good, and I have a selection of them. So I used that for the white, although I do have
the black silk thread from DeVere Silks as well in the same weight. I did some experimenting with it and it just didn't look as good, so I ended up using this, which is an elderly reel of silk buttonhole twist, and I'm using that for the black threads. And because it's 2 colours, you have to work slightly differently, and I find I have to knot off occasionally so I don't get in a tangle. So in order to get this black thread off this skein, it was actually already had to be cut into some length, so I've wound some onto a bobbin like that. With the white, I'll probably use it on the reel like that, unless I find I have to cut some off because I'm getting in a tangle. Right, we're going to try again. Maybe my partner and the dog will have stopped walking up and down the stairs, muttering to themselves. Well, it was only my partner doing the muttering, the dog was just there. So starting exactly the same as before, thread the black silk through the hole in the mould and start wrapping around to form your cross. And now that I've actually started on making the cover of the button, I need to count how many strands of black I need before changing to white. So I need to have 3 strands either side of those the cross, so 6 in total, to make up well, they're not really the corners, but they do look like the corners of the button, if that makes any sense. I don't know if you can see, but I'm pinching and holding it all quite tightly to keep everything lying as flat as possible. Or actually, having the thread on the bobbin isn't really helping, so I may end up just working with the long lengths of the black thread. So I just need to do a little bit of adjustment to make sure they're not lying on top of each other, but lying next to each other. Now, I've actually reached the end of that bit of thread. I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to knock that black thread off now to lock it in place before I start working with the white thread. So I'm just going to do, like I did at the end of the other button, I'm just going to lock these off. Alright, right. Sorry, I'm a little bit slow, a little bit faffy here, but I know from my previous experience, if you can get the first section right, the rest of it goes much more smoothly. So now we can start working with the white thread. In fact, so that it doesn't fall off, let's also thread that through, leaving a tail. And again, I want to do 3 strands of the white silk thread to form that first stripe. Because you are twisting the button, it also twists the thread, and sometimes I find I have to untangle my spool because you're putting more twist into the thread you're working with, and it makes it more likely to knot. Now we've done the correct amount of threads, but now I just need to neaten those off. So again, before going any further, I don't want to cut the white thread off, but I'm going to use this tail of the white thread and now another 3 strands of the white thread. Now I said that when the threads get a bit tangled up you have to sort of untwist them. If you're working with a whole bobbin like this, that's quite hard. So what I do is do a little slip knot over, not like that though. I try and do a slip knot over the thread and then lift it up and let it, all the untwist, spin out of it like that. There's probably a better way, but this is how I've stopped my threads getting too tangled. This is where I must admit the pearl cotton, although not authentic for the 18th century, is much, much easier to work with. So, before I let all that untangle, and now for the final white stripe. Now you can see where my Normally that just twists off, but because I'm filming this, it is of course going to not. I tell you what, 90% of the time if I film something, it just goes wrong. I hope you find this reassuring. If ever I try and demonstrate what I'm doing, it makes me wonder why on earth I try and demonstrate what I do. Because when I'm sat here quietly on my own, not filming, most of the time it goes all right. Turn the camera on, all goes to ratchet. Nope, still got a knot there, so let's just hope we can keep that to the back. Alright, I'm at the end of the white thread now, so pinching everything tightly on the back, I'm going to cut that off there. And now finally it's onto the home stretch of finishing the final black cross of the button. And you just keep wrapping here until you reach the centre, exactly the same as before, evening out the pattern and the stripes as you go to keep them, well, to sort of keep them as even as possible. Although you can see here I've got a slightly wider cross at the bottom than I have in the middle, and I want them to be, well, even than that. So again, just use your fingers to spread the threads where they need to be spread wider, or push them in to make them narrower, so that that final cross is even. And also make sure that it's densely packed enough that you can't see the white stripes underneath. So at the moment I think you can see them a little bit, but as I finish filling in those threads, the white becomes less visible and the black becomes like a more solid base, or more solid layer over the top. Once you're done, you can just threadle all your raw ends in. Here I haven't got one long enough to sew the button on with, so I will have to be adding a new length of thread to attach it to the garment. And now it's just a case of smoothing and evening until it looks exactly as I want. And here are the final finished buttons. Oh, I can now see that one I just put down is not quite as wide as the others. However, when they're all together, they look fine. And because I enjoyed making them so much, I also made 4 smaller buttons to decorate the cuffs of my coat. Now they are ready to be sewn in place. And for me, this completes the garment with a rather gothic historical flourish, absolutely perfect for the lounging Regency demon Crowley or any other historically inspired gothic creation you desire.